Hey Threadheads, welcome back to another fly tying tutorial. Darren here. Today we're going to be tying a Wombat variant. I also refer to this as Matt's Wombat. I tie this for a client on the West Coast. The pattern called the Wombat originally comes from Alaskan guide Brian Kite, and his nickname is Wombat, so hence where the name of the pattern comes from. It's a pretty simple pattern. It's got marabou wing, two different colors. You can mix and match on there. You can do the pink and orange, pink, red, orange, red, black and blue, purple, pink. Those are all nice combinations. You can adjust the weight by changing what you use as the eyes. We're using a brass eye here. You can also go into lead or just a bead chain if you want to keep things light. Don't forget to leave a comment down below and I'll get your name entered into the next draw that I do for some of the fly tying materials, some of the flies that I tie on the channel, as well as a few other goodies. Let's have a look at the material list and get started. All right, so let's get a fresh hook in the vise. Today I'm going to be tying on a 30mm shank, and I've already gone ahead and done this up ahead of time. I'll leave a link in the description, and you can find out how to do one of those on your own. Just secure that in the vise, and if you don't have a material clip that you can kind of hide that trailer hook, you'll definitely want to find a way to stop it from just being out in the open. I'm going to be using some 6/0 fire orange uni thread, and we'll just tie in right behind the eye of the hook. So we just want to make sure we got a base layer of thread for our eyes to sit upon so that they're not going to wiggle around the hook shank. We'll go ahead and flip this upside down and grab our eyes. We're going to be using these brass black colored Groovy eyes, and they fit on nicely, and especially on these wider shanks where you've got a loop back eye like on this 30mm shank I'm using. And we'll just go ahead and we'll secure the eyes. We want to put diagonal wraps at first both ways so that you've got kind of a crossover in the middle. And once I have got a few securing wraps of thread, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of the Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails here. Just add a little bit on there in between the eyes, just on the thread wraps. We just want to make sure that that cement gets soaked into the thread wraps and that it's going to secure the eye really well. Don't really want it to move around on us as we're fishing it. And we'll just go ahead and we'll keep adding a few securing wraps to that. We want to make sure that it's nice and secure in place here. When you're satisfied, we'll flip the hook back over. Now we're going to take a little bit of this Z braid. It's a flat silver braid. This one comes from Gliss and Gloss. And we'll just secure that on the top of the hook shank. And you don't have to be super accurate with the wraps here, but I do try and even out the body a little bit, although it's not going to make too much of a difference. Tie that down to the loop in the back of the hook. We want to make sure that we leave a little bit of room there for the marabou and flash and everything else we're going to be tying. I like to add just a few drops of the Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails just underneath those wraps, just so that it doesn't slide around on the hook shank. Just it's going to be nice and secure, and it's going to give your fly a little bit extra durability. We'll go ahead and we'll wrap that up to where we left our thread hanging, and doesn't really have to be all the way up there. Make sure you go in behind and in front of that just to make sure it's locked in place before you snip it off. When we come back and tie in our other materials, we'll wrap back on that body a little bit. So next we're going to take a little bit of orange Estaz, and this is just the standard size that I'm using here. And we'll tie that in by the core, just where we left off our tying thread on the silver flat braid there. We'll come back a little bit on there, and we're just going to take a couple wraps. And I just like to pull all the fibers back as I wrap this. I'm going to do 2 or 3 wraps. And part of the purpose of this is just to start forming a bit of a shoulder on the underneath the wing here. So this is going to kind of help keep the marabou propped up. A couple wraps, and then we'll sweep everything back and clean up those extra little fibers. They can kind of get in the way here if you're not careful. All right, so now we can move on. We've got some orange schlop in here, and I'm going to show you how to prepare this. So first we're going to strip off the base, anything that's got any of the fuzz, like the marabou at the bottom. If you're tying some really small woolly buggers, the fluff at the bottom there is really good for that. We're going to pull the fibers away from the stem, and we're going to pull them downward. That's going to create a nice tie-in point. We don't want it too close to the tip because that can be fairly fragile. So we'll go ahead and we'll tie that in right where we created that space. And I like to add a few wraps of thread and then fold that tip back and add some wraps over top of that. And then you can pluck that or you can cut it. So next we're going to palmer this feather. If you've got enough stem, you can just hold the stem and wrap it. And if not, you might want to grab some hackle pliers here. We just want to fold the feather back so that everything's sweeping to the rear of the fly. So unfortunately, this schlappen isn't cooperating as nicely as it should. It's got a bit of a twist in it, but we'll work with that. We're just going to keep pulling all the fibers back as we wrap, and we're going to wrap a little bit forward each time. And what I like to do is just kind of wrap forward and keep that stem exposed, but what we're going to do is come back and wrap over top of that so that the fibers are secured regardless if they're attached to the stem or not. So we'll add one more wrap here. That's probably good. And we'll tie that off and then we'll trim it up. If you've got a dubbing brush, it'd be a good time here just to give that a few combs and kind of comb out some of those trap fibers. You can clean those up a little bit. Even though that stem was really twisted, came out okay. So next we're going to add a little bit of marabou. This is our first wing of marabou. I've got a nice thin stemmed piece here. So again, we're going to prepare this pretty much the same way that we did the schlappen. I'm going to pull off a little bit from the base and then pull everything away from the stem and pull it down, and we're going to create that tie-in point again. If you got a little bit of water nearby, you can just use that to moisten your fingers. Kind of helps tame that marabou a little bit. Damp sponge will work really well for that. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to tie that onto the fly. And again, we just want to add a couple wraps of thread at that tie-in point. Fold the tip of the marabou back and make sure we wrap over it so it's really secure. We'll trim off the tip, and then we're going to just grab the stem, use our scissors to kind of help fold that feather back. And we're just going to pull everything back as we wrap it. And the more you do this, the easier it gets to do. It might be a little bit tricky at first when you're palmering like this, but just keep at it. And make sure you're using marabou with thin stems. Makes it so much easier. We'll catch that, and we'll wrap backwards over that marabou a little bit. Just want to make sure that it's secure and that it's not bare stem sitting under those wraps. I'm going to grab a little bit of flashabou for accent on the fly. I'm going to take about 4 strands of pearl flashabou. Now you can tie these in anywhere around the circumference of the fly. I like to just do it on the side, kind of presents as a lateral line. And we'll just tie it in on one side, and then we're going to just wrap over top. You can go through the eyes, or you can just go to the side here. And we'll wrap it down along the other side. If you just take 4 strands, that's usually long enough for a 3, maybe 3.5 inch fly. It should be fine. So now we're going to take our second color of marabou, and we're going to use red on this one. So again, we're going to prepare this the same way. We're just going to pull the base fibers off. You can kind of see this stem's a little bit thicker, but near the tip it's still got a lot of flexibility. And pull down the marabou. Again, we'll get our fingers a little bit wet just to make sure that it's a little bit easier to work with. Let's throw that one on the fly. So you can kind of see where you need that space when you tie in the shoulder of the fly with the estas and the schlappen. You need to leave a little bit of space to tie in your eyes, or tie in the wings and the collars here. So again, tied that in, folded the tip back, trimmed it, and then we're going to palmer the red on here. And just every wrap, you kind of take your thumb and forefinger and you just sweep everything back. And if you don't have a way to secure that trailer hook, this is where you're going to run into piercing your thumb or your finger, and I've done it plenty of times. If you don't have a way to secure that hook, one thing you can do is take a little bit of tubing and just put it over the hook, or you can just leave your hook off and add it later on. Just make sure that you create a loop that's got enough room that you can add the hook later on. So finally, we're going to add a little bit of guinea fowl. We're using a red one here. You want to take one of the larger feathers, a larger feather, one of the largest you can find. And again, it's just a lot of repetition here. We're just going to strip off the bottom, pull the fibers down, and create a tie-in point. So we've got 3 different types of feathers. We've got marabou, guinea fowl, and schlappen, and basically we're using them all the same way. So we're going to tie that in, and again, we'll fold back the tip and wrap over top of it. That just creates a really durable fly. You're not going to get these feathers pulling out very easily. And again, we'll use our scissors to kind of help push that feather fiber down before we wrap it, and pull everything towards the rear of the fly. And we'll, as long as we can get about 2 wraps of this feather, that's plenty. Just kind of adds a little bit of segmentation, breaks up the monotone color of the marabou there. Secure that. We'll trim off the stem. So you can kind of see it gives a nice blend of colors here. You got the orange in the back with the red over top. And I like to just kind of push the feathers forward a little bit. All right, so we put our thread right at the eye, and we'll take a little bit more Sally Hansen's, and we'll just add a generous amount of the head cement or nail polish or glue just underneath. And this will further help reinforce the head, and it'll also give the dubbing that we put on there something to hang on to. I'm going to take a little bit of ice dub here in an orange, and we'll put a fairly generous amount onto the thread. You don't have to go too tight with your dubbing noodle here, and in fact I like to keep it a little bit loose. In the first couple wraps I like to do right against the collar of guinea fowl here. Kind of builds that up a little bit. Then we'll do a little bit more, and we'll wrap that, basically figure eight that in between the eyes. You just want to try and get fairly good coverage. And as you're wrapping, you want to keep an eye out for any bare spots, and if you do see any on the top or the bottom, you can go ahead and add a little bit more dubbing there. Just make sure you don't trap any of the fibers down as you're doing your wraps. So just come under and over, and when you figure you've got enough on there, you can just go right to the eye. You can add your whip finish. You can add a little bit of bone dry on these forward thread wraps, or you can add just a little bit of head cement. It's your choice. We want to keep this fly as durable as possible. But that's basically it. That's your wombat. And again, you can change this up by changing the weight of your eyes. You can change the colors that you use. Again, pink and purple's nice. Purple and black's a really good color. If you're doing that, you'll want to change the color of your dubbing, your marabou, your guinea fowl, everything. And just before I put the fly in the box, I like to just pull everything forward, kind of make sure that it's not pinched down too far, and then take a dubbing brush and just give it a little brush just to kind of prim it up a little bit. Makes it look a little bit nicer, loosens a little bit of the dubbing into the body, and there you go. Hope you enjoy that. Hey fly tiers, thanks for stopping by and checking out my fly tying videos. If you enjoyed the video and want to show your support, hit the thumbs up and share it to your social networks. I hope you consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, be sure to hit the bell icon to get notifications on my latest fly patterns, tips, and reviews. If you have a question or comment, leave a message below. You'll also be entered into the next draw for some of the flies I tie and a few stickers. Until next time, this is Darren saying, keep a hook in your vise. Cheers.